Law enforcement and government agencies struggle with parking citations, often because no one will pay them. Boots or other devices are costly, and they invite confrontation when implied and later removed by enforcing employees. With Tire Tag, you can avoid many hurdles and ultimately promote public safety and revenue collection. To learn more, visit tiretag.com. Welcome to Blue Grit Radio, the podcast that explores making better cops for a better community. I'm your host, Eric Tung. I've been an active police officer since 2007. We will dive into the aspects of police culture, health and wellness, leadership, and mindset. You'll hear from experts not only from policing, but all industries as they relate to being our best with purpose, passion, and positivity. Join me as we share stories, lessons, and advice so we can all be better for ourselves, our teams, our families, and our communities. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Blue Grit Radio. This is your host, Eric. Today, I'm joined by Chief Booker Hodges. Chief, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm excited for several reasons. One is that you're working out in Bloomington, and that's for the folks that don't know, a big agency just in the Twin Cities area, right outside an area that we're going to talk about and what that has meant for policing in the last several years. At the same time, I actually know a couple buddies that I used to work with, close friends that work out in your agency. And just to be straight for the listeners, a lot of times we see national policing leaders and how they're interacting with the public and what they're talking about. And a lot of times it stays pretty localized, right? So all the California folks know what all the California leaders are saying, Washington same, Midwest same. But for you, I wasn't actually very familiar with you until one of my buddies sent me this video. Basically, you're commenting to the press about a violent criminal on this pursuit in very plain, I suppose, kind of candor, just sharing like exactly what the offender is doing and why that's so risky to the public and why you support your officers with responsible, diligent tactics to arrest that person. And so it was kind of like one of those, text threads where we're like, man, that's like real. And that's real. And it's public trust, it's transparency, and it's what the public needs to hear and what many of them, especially in the last few years, they want to hear. So I just wanted to kind of give that shout out and explain a little bit of, kind of the excitement of why, how we've come to intersect and you coming on the show.
Thanks. I think now more than ever, the truth is something that's hard to determine in society, right? And a lot of times people in my position, they like to use police language and talk around topics. And it's like, ain't nobody trying to hear that, man. Just, tell people what the truth is and keep it moving, even if it's bad, right? I mean, it's just one of those things where for me, I think it's very important that we tell people the truth and that we effectively communicate what we're doing out here. So yeah, no, I have fun every day doing it.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Well, Chief, if you could give us a little bit about your background and what brought you into law enforcement.
So I grew up here in North Minneapolis, which is quote unquote the hood. I grew in the housing projects, went through high school, went to college, and I never really thought about being a police officer, I think, until my last year in college. So I double majored in criminology and political science. My family did not like the police growing up. My dad actually hated the cops, but one thing that he taught me was, even though he hated the cops, he said, you will respect the police officers, right? So he said, you don't have to like them, but you do have to respect them. And that's always reverberated with me throughout my life. And obviously, when I was 12 years old, my dad had actually beat my mom. I mean, it was a domestic violence situation. And she died when I was 12. So, I had to deal with all that. And I think ultimately that's, may have what brought me to law enforcement. I do think people are called to this profession, and being a person of faith, I think, this is what God has wanted me to do. And I think, a lot of times when you're really looking at what God wants you to do, it's kind of what do you feel comfortable doing, right? I'm not saying it should be easy, but it's like, what feels comfortable for you? And this has always felt comfortable, even when it sucks.
Yeah. What I hear is that alignment of purpose and passion.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's the thing. People make millions of dollars selling books on what your purpose is and how to find it. And I just think, it's something that you do and you enjoy, and that you're halfway decent at, right? And a lot of times people get around their purpose or don't realize what their purpose is because maybe they think what they're good at is not something they like nor something they want to do, not realizing that if you actually took the time to do what you like and what you're good at, the other things that you might be seeking might fall into place for you. With that.
Yeah. I love how you put halfway decent at. And I think that this day and age, and maybe like I'm a borderline millennial, and it was a lot of, hey, just you can be anything, you can do anything, and that's certainly not true, right? That's not
Yeah.
true. Not everyone can do anything, but a lot of people, most people can do a lot. And I like how, even in a person in your position with your like no doubt career success can say, "Hey, like let's remove some of this pressure. Just what are you pretty good at? Like what are you halfway decent at and you like?" You'll just again, I think that is such a connection back to how this whole conversation started with how you speak very plainly to people because people want to be spoken plainly too. Like they don't want things dressed up. They want to understand and to meet people where they're at. But the real talk is really impactful.
Yeah, the real. I think a lot of times people just try to not be their true selves, right? So for me, it's always about being your true self. Yep.
Mhm.
You look behind me. I got a doctorate degree. I can speak eloquently or use verbose language with the best of them, right? But I just choose not to do that because it's not who I am. And that's the advice I try to give the Chiefs all the time: is just be yourself. Right? No one, it's too hard trying to be somebody else. Just be yourself. But a lot of times people don't want to admit who they really are. Right? And I'm not trying to criticize folks, but there's a distinct difference between manager and leader. And when a manager doesn't realize that they're not a leader, you got problems.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with being a manager, right? The vast majority of people that are in positions are managers, right?
Yeah.
Managers still have to make decisions. Managers can still lead, good agencies. But I would argue you're not going to find a manager who leads a great agency, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But manager doesn't like to be told that they're a manager, and that's if you think about this, for those of us in the law enforcement profession, if you've ever worked for a manager, you're going to find your biggest conflict with them when you start talking about leadership, because that's a language they don't understand. And there's nothing
Yeah. Yeah.
wrong
No,
with it, right?
I'm with
Because a
you.
manager's going to do things right, right? And a leader's going to do the right thing. And there's a distinct difference
Mhm.
between those two, and I mean, like I said, the vast majority of people are managers, and there's nothing wrong with that. But great managers know that they're managers, right? And they know how to function in that space. And those folks, again, can still lead agencies and lead people to be good. The
Yeah.
great, I think it's just leadership is the ones that's going to get you.
Yeah, that's so well put. I think that just to add on to that, my take is managers are fine and they're great in certain roles, perhaps, right? And we all have a leader management kind of toggle, right? So like how much does your seesaw lean this way versus that way? And some people
Yeah.
are like full, like almost complete managers. And they can be the COO, they can be the CEO, they can be the assistant chief, the commander, the chief. But I would submit that to get good to great or to navigate extreme adversity or some of the challenges that we've faced, whether it's record level retention issues and needing to navigate the biggest disparity in public trust as I've seen it or it's been
Mhm.
explained to me from people that have been in the industry far longer than me. It takes leaders, right?
Yeah.
Managers are just going to be able to maintain status quo. Cool, like you're hitting your numbers and the tasks are getting done.
Hmm.
But that to me, that's like factory work. Like if I was running a factory, I'd want a manager in the factory. But if I
Yeah.
wanted to build like 100 more factories, I need a leader to do that.
Yeah. And I think that that's the difference, right? And vast majority of people are not leaders, right? And I think that that's something that people in this profession struggle with. Title does not make you a leader at all. And fully understanding what leadership is and management, I think would really help our profession out a lot, because we do have a lot of managers in these positions, and my term that I use is museum curators. They just basically are dusting off stuff that's in the museum, Whereas my thing is, it's like, no, we're about to put a whole bunch of more stuff in here, but we're not going to do that till we're done. And, because if you're maintaining, most of these folks are in maintenance mode, right? And if you're in maintenance mode, you're in decline. It's just like your house, right? If you got a house and you're just in maintenance mode, that house is depreciating, right? Versus if you're going to paint extra walls or start fixing floors or whatever, it's just, yeah, a lot of people, but it's easy to be in maintenance mode, right? Because if
Yeah.
you're in maintenance mode, by the time you leave, someone else is going to have to fix those problems.
Yeah.
And in maintenance mode, a lot of times people don't even recognize this stuff is declining. And that's unfortunate, but that's kind of where we are in the profession. And it's not a recent phenomenon. It's where we've been for a while, because it's a profession that by and large doesn't promote risk, right? We want to be risk adverse, right?
Yeah.
And so what happens? You stop pursuing cars because there's a risk with that. Well, what's the flip side of that? First and foremost, your community ends up being less safe because people figure they can do whatever they want to do and just run from the cops, right? As opposed to looking at what technology can we use to make these pursuits safer, And maybe we need to train our cops twice a year as opposed to once every 5 years. So they're very proficient at this. And that's the difference, right? I mean, and that's, traffic enforcement. You got law enforcement agencies, like out here discouraging traffic enforcement. And it's like the data doesn't even support that. But, there's a risk with traffic enforcement,
Yeah.
right? But to me, there's a greater risk in not doing traffic enforcement.
Yeah.
And, but again, a manager, just manage, don't cause me no problems, and that's kind of the philosophy where we're at right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's almost like how do you prove the absence of something, right? So with risk aversion, and there's no mistake about it. People are it's not like we're pointing people out or anything like that. It's very public and transparent. There's a lot of, let's say, governmental leaders, elected officials, city council folk, mayors, whatever, right? All over the country that say, no, we don't want to do this because it's risky. And then a lot of police leaders, executives, oftentimes chiefs, will fall in line with that because that is their boss. And so I understand it's easier said than done to be like, well, you got to just stand up for what you believe in. But in a recent episode at the time of this recording, retired Captain Bill Frost, he kind of explained and helped us kind of dive into this challenge where oftentimes a lot of executive leaders are kind of at the behest of their elected officials, right? It's like, hey, I know I'm only here as long as the mayor will allow me to be here. So how much can I put myself out there? And sometimes you do have this dynamic where people are safe. We talked about comfort and safety because they're retirement eligible. But how much are you kind of beholden to that in that dynamic? And I'm curious what your thoughts there are on as far as like the majority of chiefs potentially being uneasy to go out there and say what needs to be said from their wealth of experience.
Well, I think a lot of it, stems from a lot of these folks get promoted they've never taken a risk in their careers, right? So let's just start there. So risk is something that's not common to them, right? And I think too, a lot of this, once you're a police chief, it's like an NFL coach, right? You can go 1-13, you're still gonna get a job someplace, right? So it's like, to me, I mean, it ain't like a cop, because if a cop gets fired, tough, good luck trying to find a job, right? Mm-hmm. But as a chief, if you get fired, it's kind of expected. It's not uncommon for that to happen, especially in some of these politically appointed positions. So my philosophy is just do what you do, be yourself. So that way you don't have to change, right? And if they don't want you for who you are, that's fine, right? I mean, but, be who you are and stick with yourself. And I get, because a lot of times I'm young for a chief. A lot of times people take these jobs, when they're in that 3 to 4 year window. But if you look nationally, they're taking a lot of people to be police chiefs who are retirees. I mean, some of these folks are 66, 63 years old, and there's a reason for that, right? There's a leadership vacuum there. And that, to me, again, proves my point about don't worry about getting fired or whatever. Just do your job, have fun, and be yourself, because it'll all work out in the end. I mean, as I said, people are going to go grab a 63-year-old person, and you're 50-something, you should be able to get a job. Yeah. Because people retire for a reason, right? Like if I'm 60 years old, you're gonna have to throw a whole bunch of money at me for me to come out of retirement, because it ain't gonna happen.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to make it an ageist thing at all, but you're kind of talking about, people having the maintenance mode. I mean, I work with a lot of fantastic people when they get close to retirement, whether they're an officer, detective, or an administrator. They are very publicly admitting that, yeah, I'm losing my steam. Like I don't want to lose my passion and excitement. I'm already starting to lose it, right? They actually communicate this in public ways. And so I think it is not unfair to recognize that most people, when they hit a certain chapter in their life, like they're not innovating. They're not bringing in, conflict to try to make things better or challenge, even one example, when you're talking about pursuits, a lot of folks just say like, yeah, they're too dangerous. End of discussion. Whereas someone that's leaning into the challenge, trying to find solutions, is like, okay, how do we make it less so? How do we take ownership, bring in some solutions, right? More training, more tech, more opportunities, rather than just accepting, right? Like we can't just accept. And this goes right back into the conversation of that, where, like many cops understand, and I think the public needs to hear that the bad guys, quote unquote criminals, right, are very aware of what we are and aren't doing. So many times you've seen, and you continue to see, literally based on the city, like they know what city they're in, and they know like, hey, if I do this, they're going to stop the pursuit. If I go into oncoming traffic for just a second, they're done. They know that because they talk about it
Mhm.
and they see it and they experiment. So I think that that just does go into brass tacks, like what we land with when we are making these kind of, you know, black and white decisions on what we're going to do.
Yeah, and that's the easy part for folks, just to say no, right? And and I want to go back to the age piece here, and I can speak for myself. They jokingly say as Chiefs we age in dog years, right? And I know, I mean, there's no way. I got 6, 7 years left. I know by the time that's over, I'm not gonna have any energy left. I mean, if you know everybody who works for me, they'll just tell you, "Oh, I'm Energizer Bunny." But man, look, I can tell you, these last 3 years, I've aged, right? It just, your body just can't do it. Maybe there's some people out there who are a little bit genetically different than me, but it takes a toll on people. And I think that's an aspect that we don't effectively communicate with our communities, not only as police chiefs and executives, but like cops, right? I mean, cops who, if you're getting in and out of that car for 20 years, that's a long time, right? And I mean, most people don't deal with the segments of population that we deal with on a frequent basis, right? I mean, the average street cop, unfortunately, the vast majority of, I mean, I want people to really conceptualize this. The average street cop, the minute they put that uniform on and start this career, the majority of people that they deal with are going to be not good people, unfortunately, right? And even when you add the people they're dealing with in their own personal life,
Mm.
that circle gets small. It's not as big as out here dealing with the public. If you're out here dealing with a lot of these people for between 8 and 12 hours a day, um, that takes a toll on you. I mean, and that's something that, we talk about officer wellness and really keeping people well and trying to ground people out. But that's one of the things, one of the guys that I worked with that retired after 30 years, he'd actually kept a journal. And, he said, first and foremost, we all fall short, the glory of God. Ain't none of us good or bad. But he had put down, like, in his time as a cop, the vast majority of people that he encountered were people who were not productive members of society. And
Sure. Yeah.
that takes a toll on
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important to remember that, right? You're
you.
leading a lot of cops and your day to day, like my day to day, is
Hmm.
oftentimes at a desk or in meetings. But that's not what policing generally is.
Hmm.
And that segment of the population, I'm glad you illustrate that for folks that are listening in that aren't in that grind, or maybe they've gone to an admin role and they kind of forget that grind, right? That out of touchness. Because even though, yeah, not everyone is a criminal, but you go into someone's house, everyone doesn't want you there, right?
Hmm.
And so even though there's no bad people in there oftentimes, and sometimes someone made a really terrible choice, but everyone doesn't want you there. And I love how
Yeah.
you even explained that the circle of people that you know in your personal life gets rapidly smaller. And
Yeah.
that's where I'm glad we're having conversations in the industry about living outside the blue world and trying to embrace and really put a in some ways like a stranglehold on those friendships and those relationships outside, because like no mistake about it, I recognized at the time, and I look back, and when I became a cop, where I made it clear that I was going that route, a lot of people wrote me off. And a
Hmm.
lot of people, as I continued to meet them at different intersections of my life, I know for a fact that they wrote me off, or they continue to do so, or they took what I had to say for with a grain of salt, assuming an extreme level of bias, an extreme
Hmm.
level of prejudice on my side, which is exactly what they're exercising. Rather than dwell on that, it's just okay, cool. How do we keep moving forward? Do want to ask you about respect and respect to the profession and the badge. And I appreciate so much that you shared some of your personal background, but even with your father feeling how he felt about police and saying, "Hey, you need to respect that position and that authority." And I think that resonates with me because, I didn't know any cops growing up. And I think that it's because, my grandparents fled a totalitarian type of government in
Hmm.
China with the communists taking over. Like, it was always deeply embedded in my story, I suppose, in my culture to be like, you respect authority. Like, I don't care like what you think about them outside of that, but like they are quote unquote the man and
Hmm.
fall in line. Right. So I think I always had that understanding. And I wonder how much everything we're talking about, literally, like, you don't have to stop for the police. You don't have to pull over. How much does that entrench the younger folk that maybe not even driving age, but they know that that's an expectation that they can just choose to try to mimic or follow, and what that does for, I suppose, the fabric of society that we're trying to hold together as police.
The respect is vital to our society, right? And this is during the Derek Chauvin, George Floyd piece. I always tried to express to people, to understand, if we as a society abandon respect, we're no longer going to have a society. right? And I would specifically talk to the educators out there, people who are teaching in these classrooms, because I'm like, who is the last line of defense, right? Like, so if you teach people not to respect the cops, right? I've been a cop for over 20 years, right? And I can count on one hand, I can't even get off one hand how many times I've spent on the job with a single kid more than 15 minutes, right? And that's even being a school resource officer in a single setting, right? So I'm like, if you teach them to disrespect me and I'm dealing with them for 15 minutes, you got to deal with them for 8 hours a day. So what do you think that translates to? And what do you think happened, right? People start doing all this stuff in these classrooms and whatnot. Respect is key. And as a society, we got to get back to respecting each other. Doesn't mean we got to like each other. Doesn't mean we got to agree with each other. But respect is not even respect for, authority. It's respect for the United States of America, man. I mean, this is the Constitution. This is the greatest country in the world. And people have forgotten that. You can respect our history, right? We got a brutal history in this country, right?
Yeah.
Respect it. Doesn't mean we got to live it out today, but respect it, understand where we come from. But just understand that this respecting those who fought for us to have everything that we have today, and that's lost on folks. And understanding, respect those who put their lives in jeopardy and go out here and protect people. And again, in some segments of the population, that's lost, right? They don't understand and they don't respect that. And I know cops in some areas get paid, but a lot of times it's still never going to be enough, right? There isn't enough money you can get paid to go out here and this wear and tear on your body. And, a lot of unfortunate times for people to lose their lives. As a society, we got to get back to respect. And if we don't, we're not going to have a country. And, if you think about when this country was founded, you go read some of the Federalist Papers. I mean, these folks didn't agree on everything, right?
No.
But it was a respectful dialogue, and people had the ability to disagree with each other without being disrespectful.
Yeah. Yeah, the polar opposites, right? We talk about the foundation of this country, and it's in some ways probably miraculous that it was even able to stand up and analyze like all the pitfalls that just barely scraped through. But because their collective goal of leaving the British government was like so prevailing that it was strong enough. And I love that you even brought that up, because if our goal is to be a piece of, right, a pillar within the structure of society, yeah, we can't. A lot of cops are like, hey, I'm not a social worker. Hey, I'm not a teacher. What about them? What about? And yes, it is all parts, and it all goes to respect. I love how you highlighted that, because that's what we want our cops to be doing, and that's what we want our cops to be doing to each other. And if we're going to foster that, build that, then as a leader manager, I got to be respectful to my people. And I remember coming up in the industry, how many people said, respect is earned. If you show me respect, I'll give you respect. I'm like, no, it's earned because you're a human, right? Like, so it's already like, that's the baseline, and we need to do better. I can't have this like, oh yeah, if a gang member that's a convicted felon that's on his third strike gives me respect, then I'll give it to him. Come on, man. Like, it's your job.
Well, as part of our application process here, that's one of the questions is how you define respect, right? If anyone says respect is earned, they don't move on to the next part of the process, right? I mean, the correct answer is respect is given, period. Regardless if it's that gang member or someone who's done some heinous crime, we're still going to respect them. We're going to respectfully lock them up, but, we're still going to respect them as human beings, because the only difference between them and us is choices. That's it. I mean, there's no other difference between these folks and us. It's just the choices that we make. And the minute we believe that it's acceptable to disrespect people, we're going to have problems in this profession.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm curious about your career progression and whether this type of role was something that was always in the back of your mind, or how that developed for you.
No, it wasn't. When I started this job, I wanted to do two things beyond SWAT and work gangs. That's it. I would have been happy with doing that. And I accomplished both of those things within the first 4 years of my career. So no, and it just kind of was a natural progression. I took the sergeant's exam because I didn't want to work for some of the other people that were going to take it.
That's such a common thing. That's a little bit of me too. Yeah.
Yeah. So you understand, man, just, I was having fun working narcotics, man, in gangs. It was just like, but I didn't want to work for some of these people. And then, as you go along, people start to see leadership in you, and then it just progressed, and I never thought I would have been the chief here. But again, I applied for this job at the last day that it was due, and I've had a good career. I mean, I've had the ability to work both sheriff's office, police departments, and state government, which is odd for me because I'm a very loyal person. So for me to switch agencies, but goes back to purpose. I've learned to listen when God says it's time to move, it's time to move. And I don't want to be disobedient, but so it's been good. But yeah, and I mean, I never planned to be a chief, right? I never planned to be a assistant commissioner of public safety, under sheriff. I never planned for any of that, but was I ready when that number was called? Yes. Right. And there was preparation that got put forth, but I went and did school. I did all the fun things. I did the sucky things too, because that's I think, they always tell you to take a job nobody else wants. And most people don't take that advice, and, make sure that that job is yours, own it, even if you don't want to do it. And it's been good. I mean, and that's the thing, like when people always at the beginning of their career, when they say they plan to want to be chief, I don't have a roadmap for them. Right. I mean, some people might lay out a roadmap for you, but I don't have one because I didn't follow one. I just say, be yourself, go out here. And, when you're a cop, your job is to be the best cop you can be. And when you want to start to be a supervisor, start thinking about, how do supervisors think? How do they make decisions? Right. Don't assume you know something about people's position, because that's one thing I can say is that I've done every job. Right. There's no one else here in this police department that's done my job. Right. And there's a difference. But I say that with respect, and respect being that even though I was a cop, I still haven't been a cop like they have in this type of environment, with this scrutiny and everything that they, have had to deal with. I haven't, by and large, I've been spared from that. And, I started in 2005. The job was a lot different than it is now. And it's going to be a lot different in 2035 than it is now. And, but again, it comes down to respect. And like I said, I don't have a blueprint for someone who wants to be the chief. You talk to somebody else, maybe they got a blueprint. And when you find it, share it with me, please.
I mean, we've seen a lot of folks that followed a traditional path, and it's usually not a lot of risk, as you said. I think that there's a lot that I want to kind of circle back to, because this theme of respect that you've shared with us so many times, like even what you just said as far as role, I think it goes down to empathy, right? Like you work a different role than your cops out on the street. But that's similar to a conversation I had with a lot of more mid-career officers when they were getting impatient when I was in a different role with new folks coming in. And I was like, you know what? Like, all these law changes are confusing. Are they not? Are they jarring? We have to literally print out cheat sheets on what we can pursue for and what we can't because of the state, all this, right? Like, for a bit in Washington State, we couldn't do much off of a Terry stop. Like, basically, reasonable suspicion, it was optional whether someone wanted to stop, and I couldn't go grab somebody because that was forced now. So we went from that stage of the game to trying to navigate that, right? So a lot of 5, 10, 15-year officers are beside themselves for a stint, right? Then I talked to those officers, and I'm in the same boat, right? And I'm like, think about what it's like to be in the police academy and have this thing change up multiple times, and you come on the street and it keeps changing again, state law, department policy. Do you not think this job is confusing enough for a new cop? Like, even when you started, I think that when we take a step back, we pause, we reflect, we're like, yeah, it is a lot. It's like, okay, I've never been a new cop in 2023, 2021. That's got to be a lot. Like, thank you for even coming to entertain this job in these years, right? That's more than I could say for most people. And so I think when we take a step back and we realize that we don't know what we don't know, and we just have some pause and curiosity, it really helps. I've shared this before, but as an officer, I think it's a little bit of coming of age, and maybe just in any respect, but challenging what the Sarge had to say, right? Like, why are we walking away, Sarge? This and that, respectfully, of course, offline, and then having some things shared with me where at first I was like, I don't know, I disagree. But then as I sat with it longer and longer, I'm like, okay, I can kind of start to see what he's saying. And then years later, as a sergeant in a very similar situation where my officers are coming to me, hey, why did we do that? I'm like, all right, like, yeah, let's have that conversation, because I know I was there. Like, I was literally there. Or to be a sergeant and so frustrated with how something was delivered in a meeting, and then find myself saying something that, thankfully someone like another sergeant tells me later, like, hey, boss, that didn't go over so well. I'm like, shoot, that's not what I was trying to get across, right? But it's just that empathy, and it's so tricky, especially when you haven't done that role, but then you get closer to it, you talk to those people, and then you find, okay, there are a lot of challenging kind of factors that make this whole cultural alignment and collaboration stickier than, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, and that's that's a big piece too for a lot of these folks, is that change in perspective. like you said, right? And that's one of the things that we try to communicate to our sergeants, as part of the process too, of the promotional process, is the ability to start communicating effectively with the troops, right? And why you're making decisions. Because a lot of times if people don't understand why you're making decisions, that's going to drive some problems for you, right? Because as cops like things explained to them, right? Whether they agree with it or not, as long as you explain it to them, you're gonna be fine. And a lot of times they know the answer to why you're making a decision, right? Or you may have a piece of information that they might not have, and like you said, the ability to effectively communicate that to them, like it was done to you, and then you have your aha moment. And I think that story that you have there is something that I think would be good to share with new sergeants too, and even the troops, right? To understand that these are how these decisions are being made and the things that we consider. And like you said, coming into the profession now with all the changes, I give them credit. I mean, there's just a lot of changes going on in this profession, and it's hard to keep up with. And that's why, for me, I've always said when I retire, I'm not going to teach, because if I teach, I'll be teaching history. It's just one of those things that, the job is just, it's so different, never changed as fast as it has today, not only with policies and laws, but with technology. I mean, think about this, it's kind of crazy that you got a computer program that can write your report for you. Right. And that, something that if you'd have said that 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, people would have laughed at you. Right. But you have police departments right now in this country that AI is writing their reports.
Yeah.
And that's something that, so what policy do you have around that? Right. Now, can you hire the person that may not be able to write as well because the computer can write the program for them? Right. Whereas before, if you couldn't write, it was like, you're out of here. Right. So I don't. So all these things, man, that are just changing, it's gonna be interesting to see how this all turns out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's so impactful because, you brought it up earlier, but trying to find solutions and work through the challenges, not just, well, we're going to stay right here and stay in our lane and let the world pass us by. I mean, in the state of Washington right now, or I suppose in our county, there was a pretty carte blanche message saying, hey, no AI in your reports at all. And I do imagine that will be amended, and I'm not trying to point fingers because it does need to be managed, and you need to have proper procedures and policies to prevent some of these things like accidental perjury, things like that. Like make sure it's all factual. Have these, I suppose guardrails built in. But all to say, like one of my big things that I try to remind myself or challenge other people around is just ask why not. Like, okay, why can't we do that? And then that goes into some of the explanation that you shared, which is that if we look at the thing, then we can start finding things that'll improve or mitigate some of the overwhelming risks, things like that. One thing I want to ask you is, you kind of shared that your progression was determined a lot by where you could serve and potentially where the need was. And maybe I'm curious if this resonates with you, but for me, I try to suggest folks when they think about testing or they're trying to pick brain and trying to really put themselves under the microscope and wonder whether they should take this role or not. I try to suggest people to think about their personal mission and the organizational mission and where that intersects, like as far as their purpose, passion, and then the need, like the quote unquote need for the group and for them. Is that something that you've kind of applied as far as your own progression and experiences?
Yeah, for me, it's always about the why, right? And this is what I tell people who want to put in for something. Why you're putting in for it is the most important reason, right? Because the why is going to keep it going when it sucks, right? And it's going to suck at some point, right? But the why is what's going to keep you coming to work. The why is what's going to keep you have a positive attitude. And ultimately, the why is going to get you through the tough times. And if the why is not good enough, then maybe you shouldn't do this, right? Because if the why is about you, then maybe you shouldn't do this. And in terms of when people get promoted and even people join this profession, I think the why, and like you say, the organizational mission, that's one thing most people in police departments don't know their organizational mission, right? Which is, I mean, and I learned this, God, it's probably been 13, 14 years ago. I went in a roll call as a sergeant and I put $100 bill on the table and I said, anybody can tell me what the mission statement is, gets this $100 bill. Don't pick up your phones, leave your phones, and no one could do it, right? So that, to me, and I'm confident now in this police department, people can tell you what our mission is, right? Which is obviously to be the most respected police department in the country. I mean, it's simple to remember, or always be respectful while keeping our community safe, right? I mean, it's simple to remember, right? And, cops operate good when we give them purpose and mission, and it's got to be something that they can remember. But to repeat myself, the why is what I focus on.
Yeah. I love that. One thing, I suppose, and for those that listen in oftentimes on to this show, they are people that are trying to put themselves under the microscope and trying to develop. One guy I was talking to, he's 7 years in, right? And
Mhm.
I love that he even said when I was talking about goals and things that he's thinking about his career, he has several things he knows he wants to do. And because of his age and his experience, he's like, I mean, maybe I'd advance to command staff or assistant chief. I don't know. Like, I want to keep growing and challenging myself. And I love that. And I think that that's uncommon for people to even speak into existence.
Mhm.
What types of things would you suggest your developing leaders think about as far as you have a doctorate, you're highly educated, especially for law enforcement, where some folks go that traditional academia route alongside their career, I suppose, rank ascension, and others do not. What would you suggest people think about when they are considering these other types of developmental tools or resources?
So I'm going to say something that probably no other administrator is going to tell you, right? Look outside law enforcement for training, because the traditional model is let's send these people to these law enforcement leadership specific training and you're getting taught by managers. Look at some of the private sector training, what's Target got, what's Google got. Everybody's got these companies in their communities. What do they have? What are they offering for leadership training, right? It's time to look outside law enforcement because, again, unfortunately, in law enforcement, we're doing that circle around where we're getting the same type of training from managers.
Hmm.
So, like, if I was coming up, like, one thing, like, for my academic career was I didn't go to school with any cops in my doctorate program. There was a single police officer in there. These were people who were from the other aspects of the public and private sector. So I got to learn a lot from them that I have yet to hear repeated in any law enforcement training that
Sure.
I've
Yeah.
attended in my entire career. So if you're looking to come up, really look at those leadership trainings in the private sector. And you're going to see too a focus on there that I think the biggest difference is on consumers, right? And we don't view people as consumers, but they are consumers of police services, right?
Yeah.
And the reason we don't view them is that because they don't have a choice in terms of picking a police department. But just think about what type of leader you can be if you viewed people who call us as consumers, right? Because then if we view them as consumers, then we're going to offer services that they need, not that we want to impose on them. And that's leadership,
Hmm.
right? Offering people what they need versus what we've been taught to give them. So yeah, look outside law enforcement for training, man. I mean, that's the biggest piece of advice I would give people moving forward.
Yeah, I love that. And the consumers, absolutely, the community members, but also like if you're talking about organizational change and culture, that's your people, right? And so I love how you explained to look outside because when I took over recruiting in 2021,
Mm,
there's all these kind of cop trainings on recruiting and national crisis. Like anyone has it figured out because it's literally happening right now. But
mm,
one of my guys like sent me this training. He's like, "Hey, do you want to go to this with me?" And I'm like, "I don't want either of us to go to that." You know why? Because they're gonna do what everyone else is doing. I want to do what everyone's not doing. And so it was like a lot of podcasts about organizational culture and building and leadership, a lot of private sector, a lot of fantastic free resources, just getting your mind working in a different direction or maybe through a different filter. So that's why I love this project. And I know just from looking at the traction episode to episode, the highest downloads are oftentimes cops. And I'm like, okay, cops are listening. That makes sense. That's
mm,
a lot of the main target audience. But I do encourage those people to go back through the archives and listen to people that are other professionals, right? So even
mhm,
if you're trying to develop your wellness program, yes, please listen to that civilian that's talking about what they have devoted their life to because there's so much wisdom that we can learn from them. And I appreciate that because we are not working and living in a vacuum of just cops dealing with cops. We are
mhm.
dealing with every single type of person there ever was in our communities.
Yeah. And and that's one of the things too, you touched on wellness. I'll just be very brief on this. Your chief isn't using your wellness program or doesn't feel comfortable using it, then it's probably not that good of a wellness program,
Hmm.
right? It's probably check the box. The program we have here, I will feel comfortable using. And that's one of the aspects when you're creating these programs. I believe it has to be something that everybody would feel comfortable using, and it can't just be check the box.
Yeah, well said. Well, Chief, I want to be mindful of your time. I appreciate so much of the insights and experiences and wisdom that you shared with us. Is there anything that you'd like to share with the audience, as far as recapping or even, we talked about wellness just here, what you would suggest people think about as they continue on through their career and beyond?
So I think, and I'll close on this for law enforcement. Policing and politics don't mix. And social media and everything now is trying to force us to support this party, hate this party, or vice versa. policing and politics don't mix. And when you understand that, at the end of the day, both parties or whatever party will use us because we're in the middle, right? That's our job. Our job is to be in the middle and be the gap. So just don't mix policing and politics, and don't let nobody allow you or suck you into mixing policing and politics. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, we are the leaders of society, and we have to be here for all the folks, even the ones we don't like or we may not agree with. But when we start mixing policing and politics, we have problems.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate it. Thank you for tuning into another episode of Blue Grit Radio. As always, support this community by subscribing, giving us a 5-star review, and following, liking, and sharing posts on Blue Grit Wellness on Instagram. You can reach me there or email me at bluegritwellness@gmail.com. Be well and stay gritty.